Smithy, what are your takeaways from Melbourne 2023?
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit along the lines of Craig Bellamy. Like, if you think back to the very start of this year, like they had a pretty good pre-season. You know, the matches that they played, they had some good results. They showed some of the youngsters, some of the rookies coming through. You know, maybe potentially getting some time in the NRL, and things looked pretty exciting for the Melbourne Storm. But then they turned up round one, had a very strong victory against Parramatta away from home. But then they went loss both to the Doggies and the Titans, which for me, I was just then sitting going, oh geez, I don't know, there's just something missing with this footy side this year. And you know, as Craig mentioned, there's a fair bit of personnel turnover off the end of last season with, you know, the two Bromwich brothers, Jesse and Kenny, Felice Kafusi, of course, and Brandon Smith. Now, people can say, well, yeah, look, they were getting on a little bit, you know, particularly the first three that I mentioned. But, you know, what they provided for that footy side, not just, you know, their football ability, but their presence and their leadership, I think that was certainly missed. You could see that particularly towards the back end of the year, Kempy, and when the Storm were involved in those big matches. At times, they just looked a little bit lost. You know, I'm not saying that they were never, ever in those games, but just when there was times to, you know, settle the football side or make a decision where they need to just stick to a game plan or stay in the fight, it seemed as though that no one was willing to make that decision. So, for mine, we spoke about it a lot this year, about, you know, them being probably one big man short. I think that affected their season. And certainly, I think they just lacked a little bit of leadership at stages throughout the year where, if they had a few of those older heads in the footy side, maybe they get them through those tougher stages of games and parts of the season.
Yeah, I think the Storm find themselves in it's not a tough spot because most other clubs would kill to be in this spot. When you compare them to yesteryear, it's a little bit of a tough spot in my opinion because unfortunately in the last 3 or so years or 2 years, they haven't really fired a shot in finals footy. And this is a finals team. You know, this isn't a team that's happy to be there. This is a team that gets into finals and makes a bit of noise. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, and the reason why I say it's a hard spot is because you still made a prelim. So it's kind of like,
yeah.
You know,
it seems all doom and gloom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you expect a lot of, you know, good things from the Melbourne Storm, and we're all sort of used to seeing them playing in grand finals. But, you know, they would, I believe Craig would feel as though they were well below their own standard this year as a team and as individuals at times. But they still made a prelim, as you said. They still made a prelim. They, you know, they managed to finish third on the ladder, which is a very tough thing to do in this competition. Like you got to be up and you got to be, you know, relatively consistent to be in that position. The two most consistent sides are in the grand final. Yeah. That's the reason why they are there. They're the two best sides and the two most consistent footy sides. But you have to have some sort of quality about you to finish in the top four, and the Melbourne Storm did that. But I think I reckon they would be looking back on their season and some like particular games, and they would be lamenting the opportunities that they let slip.
Now, in regards to changes or different ways you'd approach things, me personally, for the Storm, I think they need to go into the market for 1 or 2 forwards. And I also think heading into next year, whether Pappy's good to go or whether Fa'alongo is good to go, I would be moving Meaney to centre because Meaney has proven that, A, he's one of your most consistent, but he really does represent what the Storm is all about. It's getting the best out of what you've got. So I'd bulk him up a little bit in the off-season. I'd move him to centre, and then I would, because you know he's going to do a job, and then I would move Fa'alongo or Pappy, obviously, if he's good to go, to fullback. What would you change, or what would be your method going into 24 for the Storm?
Yeah, well, I think they'll get back to working hard and looking at those areas that they weren't so good at this year. You know, Craig spoke about how, you know, for the most part of their season, it was very up and down. So consistency is what he'll want to build over the preseason, and whatever form of training that he comes up with to improve that part of their game, that will be his focus. I think he would be more happy to see an ultra consistent footy side rather than a side that's brilliant one week and not so good the next week.
Mm.
You know, he always talks about that gap between your best and your worst. And I think this year that gap widened a little bit with the Melbourne Storm. But yeah, I agree with you with, you know, the situation with Nick Meaney. Look, he's been, as far as consistency goes, like I reckon he's been their most consistent performer all year. Where the gap between his best and worst was quite small. I was a little bit surprised, Kempy. I thought Craig was gonna bring in a bit of a smoky and put Failongo into the 17 for that prelim final.
Yeah, I thought.
Did you think that was a possibility?
Well, I just thought, you know, and this is no disrespect for the current Storm squad, but I just felt heading into that final series, X factor wasn't there for you. And it sounds a bit crazy because you got Munster and Hughes, but it just didn't seem to be clicking for them. Whereas like Failongo, he just, you know, you never want to go into a game say you're beaten, but sometimes you need to make tactical decisions or tactical risks. And I think Failongo could have been that for them when they needed points, especially when they got in that grind a little bit. So, yeah, I actually thought, well, it's interesting because the week before, I actually said before the Roosters game, I was like, maybe he brings Failongo in there, and he was actually 19th man, I think. So it is going to be interesting to see how he uses him in 24.
Well, I think the news on Ryan Papenhuyzen is relatively positive, right? On the fractured ankle, like he did a fair job on it with Big Nelson landing on his ankle, but I think he's going to be back running sort of early in the new year, Kempy.
Yeah, wow.
So if he can get up and be running and have a really decent pre-season, he'll be fit and firing and ready to go round one. And just I'm touching wood. I'm trying to find a piece of timber right now, but I'm touching wood that he can get through, you know, at least 20 matches next year and play out the majority of the season.
Because, like, watching the Storm for the limited amount he did play, geez, he brought energy around the ruck. Like, you could see they looked like a different side when Pappy was on and around the field. It was just that, you know, energy, the quick play of the balls, just being there. We're going to head to a break. After the break, we're going to do a Warriors season review. Eddie, what did you make of the Warriors 23 season?
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic, mate. They, like, massive improvement off last year, and you and I spoke about it, how we thought that there was going to be a huge spike in their performances, given that they were back home, they were more settled, you know, and you couple that with the form of a few of their players, the leaders of their footy side, Sean Johnson, of course, Tohu Harris and Adam Fanua-Blake. I thought those three were incredible for the entire season. But they were supported by some wonderful players around them as well. Charles Nickel-Klogstad was great at the back. I thought Dylan Walker was very good as well, Kempy, throughout the year. He played as a utility. He played multiple positions throughout the year. But, look, they were great. And, you know, Andrew Webster needs to take a lot of credit for, you know, the turnaround, the transition into what is now a top four footy side. And I just hope that it's not a flash in the pan for them. I hope this year isn't like a 2022 that the Cowboys had, where, you know, they went so good and promised so much, and then coming into the following season, there was all these high hopes around, you know, them, you know, following up with another strong season and then just not delivering. So for mine, I think they have the players to do it. I think they have the squad to do it. You know, the inclusion of Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is so exciting. It's so good for our game that Roger's back. Been away for a few years now, but he's going to add so much to that footy side. He's going to, well, if he can create more interest for them than what they have at the moment, I think he could do that in New Zealand. But in just as an overall, how good is it to see the Warriors doing well and rugby league so popular in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, it's actually, I agree with you. I hope it's not a flash in the pan, similar-ish to the Cowboys. Now, Cowboys can always come back and play well next year. But I also think that it's even the responsibility is even more for the Warriors because they've gained so much momentum, as you just discussed, that if they were to come out next year and lose that momentum, it's almost back to square one. It's almost the old, here we are, back to the old Warriors. So this opportunity, there's an argument to be made that they actually come into the season with more pressure because if they miss this opportunity to get that groundswell to continue to get on board with the Warriors, it could genuinely change rugby league forever in the country. And it could take the Warriors into, it may not win a grand final. I mean, they could. They could win it next year, but they may not do it in the next year or two. But it's all about that 15 or 14, 15, 16-year-old that's sitting there going, you know what? I'm not going to go and play union. I'm going to play league, and my goal is to play for the Warriors because it's a powerhouse now,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of effect that this momentum could have for New Zealand Rugby League. And so the pressure heading into next year for Webster is to make sure that they almost cement themselves as a top six, maybe top eight, but top six I think should be their goal next year. Yeah, well, I mean, you've dealt with at the Storm. You've dealt with expectation. Arguably the most expectation any jersey's had in the modern era.
Yep.
How do you heading into that next year? How do you make sure that standards don't drop?
Well, I think it starts with Andrew Webster as coach, of course, and then those three guys that I spoke about, the leaders of that football side, they've got to drive the standards. There's no other way about it because if you just think it's going to happen, Kempy, it won't. If you think, oh, well, we finished top 4 last year, Rogers coming in, that's going to make us a better side. We'll just turn up and it'll happen. Like, it doesn't. It'll start. Look, those players involved in that prelim the other night, beaten by the Broncos, it will hurt. It will hurt for a number of weeks. So I think those players need to think about that. They need to think about that feeling that they felt the other night when they were knocked out of the competition by the Broncos. But then they also have to reflect on what a fantastic season they had and the reasons why they played so well. Like what allowed them to have such a successful season and play some great football? Was it part of their preparation? Was it the training that they were doing? Was it their settled life away from football as well? And that needs to be replicated. That needs to be done again. And they need to try and go to another level when they turn up at training in pre-season. They need to push each other to go again. That's the challenge. And as far as expectation is concerned, like, expectation will be on them now from particularly their fans over in New Zealand. But the most important or really the expectation that matters is their own expectation and their own standards that they need to set.